On the night of June 5, 2002, in the quiet city of Salt Lake City, Utah, a crime unfolded that would grip the entire nation. 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart was taken from her bedroom in the middle of the night while her younger sister lay beside her, terrified and frozen in fear. What followed was 9 months of captivity, manipulation, and survival, ending in one of the most remarkable rescues in modern history. The kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart was not only a shocking crime, but it also exposed the flaws in how missing children cases were investigated, challenged the way the media covered such stories, and highlighted the unimaginable strength of a young girl who refused to be broken. Elizabeth Smart came from what many described as the picture-perfect family. She was the second of 6 children in a devout Mormon household. Her parents, Ed and Lois Smart, lived in an upscale neighborhood, and Elizabeth was known for her intelligence, her kindness, and her love for music. She was a talented harpist, often playing at family and church events. At just 14 years old, she was entering the stage of life where childhood innocence meets the possibilities of the teenage years. But that innocence was shattered in the early morning hours of June 5, 2002. Sometime after 2 a.m., a man entered the Smart household through an open kitchen window. He carried a knife and crept silently into Elizabeth's bedroom, where she was sleeping next to her 9-year-old sister, Mary Catherine. He shook Elizabeth awake and whispered threats, telling her to come with him or he would hurt her and her family. Elizabeth, stunned and frightened, obeyed. The man led her out of her home, through the quiet suburban streets, and into the darkness of the nearby mountains. Mary Catherine, though frozen in terror at the moment, witnessed enough of the abduction to later describe the intruder to police. The kidnapper was Brian David Mitchell, a 48-year-old drifter with a long history of instability and disturbing religious delusions. He had once worked as a handyman at the Smart family home, which is how he had come to know them. Mitchell saw himself as a prophet, claiming to receive divine revelations and referring to himself as Emmanuel. Alongside him was his accomplice and wife, Wanda Barzee, who shared his twisted worldview and helped him carry out his crimes. For Mitchell, abducting Elizabeth Smart was part of a self-declared revelation that she was to become his second wife in a polygamous union. Once Elizabeth was taken into the mountains, she was forced into a crude campsite hidden among the trees. There, Mitchell conducted a bizarre and cruel marriage ceremony, declaring Elizabeth to be his wife. What followed was months of abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual. Mitchell controlled every aspect of Elizabeth's life. He disguised her in veils and robes, restricting her identity, and told her that escape was impossible. He used religion as a weapon, manipulating her with claims that God had chosen her for this purpose and that any attempt to flee would bring death to her and her family. Meanwhile, the search for Elizabeth Smart was massive and immediate. Her disappearance shocked the community. Thousands of volunteers joined search parties, combing the mountains and neighborhoods. Flyers and posters with Elizabeth's photo were plastered across the city, and the story quickly became national news. Her parents made emotional public pleas, begging for her safe return. Police initially struggled with leads. The abduction appeared to be random, and with no ransom note, no clear motive emerged. For months, investigators chased false leads. At one point, attention focused on a local handyman named Richard Ricci, who had a criminal record and had once worked at the Smart home. Ricci was arrested on unrelated charges and publicly named a person of interest. The Smart family was devastated by the speculation, as it distracted from the true perpetrator. Ricci later died in prison of natural causes, his name forever tied to a case in which he had no involvement. This misstep highlighted the desperation investigators felt and the pressure they were under as the public demanded answers. Back in captivity, Elizabeth endured daily struggles to survive. Mitchell and Barzee forced her to live in squalid conditions, deprived her of food, and constantly reinforced psychological control. Yet Elizabeth later described how, even in her darkest moments, she held on to hope. She prayed, she remembered her family, and she believed that one day she would be rescued. Her resilience became the thread that kept her alive. 9-year-old Mary Catherine, who had witnessed the abduction, also became key to the case. Initially too traumatized to recall many details, months later, she suddenly remembered that the intruder's voice matched that of Brian David Mitchell, the drifter who had once done odd jobs for the family. This breakthrough finally gave investigators a solid lead. Sketches of Mitchell were released to the public, though at first the tips were slow to come in. Mitchell and Barzy, meanwhile, became emboldened. They took Elizabeth out in public, disguising her in robes and a veil so that only her eyes showed. They traveled on buses, walked down streets, and even had encounters with police, yet no one realized Elizabeth's true identity. The disguises, combined with Elizabeth's fear of speaking out under constant threats, kept her hidden in plain sight. Mitchell even took Elizabeth to California for a time, wandering the streets as if they were a family, but they always returned to Utah. Finally, in March of 2003, the breakthrough came. After 9 months of captivity, a couple recognized Mitchell and Barzy walking with a young girl in Sandy, Utah, just miles from Elizabeth's home. The couple had seen the recently released sketches and noticed the odd trio. They contacted police, who quickly arrived on the scene. When officers confronted Mitchell and Barzy, Elizabeth at first hesitated, still under the psychological grip of her captors. But when asked directly if she was Elizabeth Smart, she quietly confirmed her identity. She was rescued on March 12, 2003, ending a nightmare that had lasted 276 days. The news spread instantly. Elizabeth was alive. Her return was nothing short of miraculous, as many had feared the worst. The Smart family's reunion was emotional and broadcast around the world. The community that had spent months searching for her celebrated her survival, and the story became one of hope and resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. The legal process that followed took years. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy were arrested and charged with kidnapping and sexual assault. However, Mitchell's case became complicated due to questions of mental competency. He claimed to be a prophet and often disrupted court proceedings with bizarre religious outbursts. For years, hearings dragged on as courts debated whether he was fit to stand trial. Finally, in 2010, Mitchell was convicted of kidnapping and unlawful transportation of a minor across state lines. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, where he remains today. Wanda Barzy cooperated with authorities and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In 2018, she was controversially released, sparking outrage from Elizabeth Smart, who spoke out against her release. Elizabeth's survival and eventual testimony in court became a defining part of the story. She bravely faced her captors, recounting the abuse she had endured. More importantly, she refused to let the kidnapping define her life. After her rescue, Elizabeth went on to become an advocate for missing children and victims of sexual abuse. She founded the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, dedicated to prevention and recovery efforts. She also worked with organizations like the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, using her voice to inspire and protect others. Her story also brought major changes in how missing child cases are handled. At the time of her abduction, the Amber Alert system was still in its early stages. Elizabeth's case highlighted the need for quicker, nationwide alerts and better coordination between law enforcement agencies. Today, Amber Alerts are a standard tool across the United States, saving countless lives. The kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart was more than just a crime story. It was a cultural moment. It raised questions about how safe children really were in their own homes, about the failures of law enforcement in the early stages, and about the resilience of survivors. It became a story of both terror and triumph, of darkness but also of light. For Elizabeth, her ordeal was unimaginable, but her recovery has been extraordinary. She later wrote books, gave speeches, and even worked with law enforcement to improve training on handling child abduction cases. She married, started a family, and continued to live her life with strength and purpose. In interviews, Elizabeth has said that she refuses to be defined by what happened to her. Instead, she defines herself by how she chooses to live after it. The case remains a reminder that evil can strike even in the safest of places, but also that courage and resilience can overcome unimaginable circumstances. Elizabeth's story continues to inspire millions, proving that survival is possible even in the darkest times.